Hi, everyone. We already have a few attendees that are popping in. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll get started in 3 minutes. Cindy, your video is still off. Maybe you can also turn it on. We have myself here, Milena Engel from Commonland, and Cindy from Commonland, and Nathan from Burn Manufacturing, and Edwin from Task. Yeah, we're still waiting for everyone to come in. People will just be coming in spontaneously, but I think it's important for us to, start in 2 minutes. So for now, just enjoy the slide. Yes, so if whoever's here already, if you want to, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We have a Q&A as well, so the Q&A is meant for during the presentation. But if you would like to say something or share a resource or just introduce yourself in the chat, please do. We'd love to see who's here today with us. We cannot see you. We are in the webinar format of Zoom, so we can only see the panelists who are here, but we see lots of names and people popping in. We'd love to hear a little bit more about where you're tuning in from. Also, the session today will be recorded, and if you would like the recording, just reach out to us afterwards and we will share it with you personally as well. All right. It's 1:30 here, so I think we'll just get started. Sound good? Welcome everybody to our first webinar of our Carbon Fest. Today will be about continuous monitoring of cookstoves, and I realize I made a spelling mistake here, monitoring with N, of course, but I apologize for that. So today we'll be exploring how different companies or organizations monitor the use of improved cookstoves. And before we do this, I just wanted to give a little bit of context to why this is interesting to us at Commonland. So just a sort of brief overview. Commonland is a non-for-profit system developer of large-scale landscape restoration projects. And essentially what we do is we connect and support landscape partners in making their landscapes and communities healthy over time. And we do this by using the 4 returns approach. Here you can see pictures of some of our Commonland colleagues in India and doing a stakeholder working with relevant stakeholders. And I won't go too much into depth about what the 4 returns framework is, but if you're interested in this, then you can go onto our website or onto the 4 returns platform, and then you can read a little bit more about it. Another very concrete thing that we do is we support landscape restoration by also working with partners in developing carbon projects. And these carbon projects aim to bring natural, financial, social, and inspirational benefits to local communities. And what is very important is that these benefits are not for profit. So they're given to communities for development projects, but we as Commonland don't get any profit from that. And one such project, as you can see maybe on this slide, is a Cookstove initiative that we are working on in Zambia. So you can see here some pictures from the Zambia project. And as many of you guys though also know, the carbon projects and Cookstove projects have received lots of criticism for their effectiveness recently. And especially in terms of diminishing CO2 emissions. So for our future sub-Saharan Cookstove projects, which will be led by Cindy, who's also in the panel here, we're very determined to improve the monitoring of the Cookstove usage within the local communities to better show what impact they have and also continue to provide these co-benefits to the local communities. And to gain some deeper insights into how can we possibly do this, Cindy invited Edwin, who's in this panel here as well, from Task, and Nathan from Burn Manufacturing, to learn from them and to hear what their experiences are in deploying improved cookstoves and also how they monitor their use. And just a little overview of what we're going to do today. So we had now a tiny introduction to why this is interesting for us from Commonland, but we'll also get an introduction from Edwin and Nathan about Task and Burn Manufacturing. And then there will be a Q&A and a conclusion and some next steps that we can take together. Maybe one thing I just want to emphasize is that this is really a learning session. So feel free to ask any questions that you have. We really invite a diversity of stakeholders and experienced people to ask their questions from their perspective. And yeah, anything is welcome. Just pop it in the Q&A and then we'll look through them as we go on with the webinar. Here is just another overview of our speakers today. We have Nathan from Burn Manufacturing, Task, and Cindy, who is so carbon project developer at Commonland, and who will be leading the discussion today. So I think without further ado, Nathan, I'll give you the lead. You can start with your presentation and talk a little bit about Cookstove projects at Burn Manufacturing. I'll just stop sharing and see if it. Great.
Thanks for that, Milena. I hope everyone can hear me, and thank you all for attending. Just a quick intro. My name is Nathan Gachugi. I am the head of carbon operations here at Burn Manufacturing, located in our Nairobi office. I oversee a team of project managers and carbon technical officials who design and conduct the monitoring for our carbon assets for our projects all across the continent. Just a little window in terms of who we are as Burn Manufacturing and what we've been looking at over the last 10 years of our experience. So we started in around 2010, and since then we've distributed more than 3.6 million cookstoves, affecting more than 15.5 million lives. Within that period, we've estimated that we've saved about 8 million tons of non-renewable biomass, which is either wood or what would have been wood converted into charcoal, with about 12.3 million tons of carbon that has been avoided or reduced by our interventions. Just to give you a quick overview in terms of how all of that collates into our overall project. So traditionally, we evolved from a brick and mortar manufacturing company of improved cookstoves to an all-in-one operation that combines both the manufacture and distribution, sales of our improved cookstoves, both biomass and electric. And now we have developed in-house capability to develop and transact our carbon assets. We are in now 20 countries across Africa with different stages of projects in development. Those boxes highlighted, those countries marked in deep green are projects where we have verified and operational carbon projects registered typically with the gold standard. And then those projects in the lighter green are prospective markets you should be looking to explore in 2024 and into the more near term. So just to reiterate in terms of how we structure and scale our operations, our in-house engineering team at our factory in Kiambu here in Kenya does all of the work associated with project design and certification. So all of our projects, all of our cookstoves rather, have been independently verified and tested to have the best-in-class fuel emissions reductions as associated with the thermal efficiency gains, together with lower CO2 and particulate matter emissions. We have a competent and well-distributed manufacturing and distribution team, starting with our factory here in Kenya, as well as distribution outfits all across our active markets in West Africa, Southern and Central Africa, and indeed East Africa. We also have an in-house monitoring, reporting, and verification capacity, so a team of MRV enumerators who can be dispatched and are dispatched all across our project locations for a multiplicity of functions. This includes part of from the carbon perspective, the feasibility and baseline surveys that we do, together with the market assessments that establish willingness to pay and other demographical variables prior to our entry. Then, of course, in the tail end, there is our carbon finance and legal teams who structure and ensure that we are able to raise and secure the carbon financing that will allow us to scale and distribute our cookstoves to the people who need them the most. A snapshot here is provided about some of our biomass cookstoves in terms of their independently verified capability, both from a financial perspective as well as a socioeconomic developmental perspective. We find that our stoves are pretty best in class, especially for the stove offerings that are available in Africa, with independently verified financial savings of $119 to $140 a year, with fuel savings both for charcoal and wood that stretch between 55 to 70%. We are seeing huge returns that have been complemented by increased stove usage and adoption of our cookstoves across the continent. We are really excited this quarter to be launching, and we already have launched our electric cooking offering. So in addition to our traditional improved cookstoves, we are now looking at an opportunity to distribute more and more of our electric cookstove offerings. So starting off with our induction cookstoves, which are smart metered, IoT and GSM enabled cookstoves that allow us to see and track real-time kilowatt hour usage of our stoves in the field. We're now looking forward to launching in East Africa and in West Africa this year, our induction cookstoves that will allow for households to transition away from traditional biomass into more of the modern access to electricity. So even greater improvements in terms of the environmental attributes associated with these products, but even greater socioeconomic benefits. And by this, I mean less indoor air pollution and a complete, if not near 90% elimination of their traditional charcoal consumption in their baseline. All across our projects, we've started to standardize what we call co-benefits. So Milena had talked about how cookstoves play a complementary role to natural and forest projects in terms of the socio-economic benefits that they're associated with. Our projects are independently verified and certified for at least 8 of the SDGs, which are for mention on the screen here below, which we monitor and track for each of our projects, but which we also conduct randomized control trials to independently verify. So that's a quick snapshot in terms of who we are as Burn Manufacturing. I'm sure we'll get into deeper discussion in terms of what we are looking for when it comes to usage and monitoring.
Great. Edwin, do you want to provide a brief? Nathan, sorry, just to clarify, we'll go into the details then after Edwin presents his brief introduction. Okay, fantastic. Edwin, so I'll give you the floor.
Cool. Let me just share my screen quickly. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Good. So yeah, once more, thanks Cindy and Milena for asking us to participate in this webinar, and also thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully we can have a real exciting discussion around cookstove monitoring. and Cookstove projects as a whole. So I'm Edwin Cogho. I am a carbon project development manager for Task. We are still a very relatively small outfit, although we are small, we have quite a big footprint of projects across Southern Africa, and we're also now starting out in Australia and Southeast Asia. So who we are as Task, we are a carbon project developer, and we specialize in developing high impact greenhouse gas mitigation projects. We pride ourselves in deploying the most technologically advanced devices for which are suitable for the specific need that where we operate in. Thus far, we've got a couple of projects running. The majority of them are Cookstove projects, but we've also got some other projects in other spaces. So we typically we run a project from origination all across over to project management, as well as the sales of the credits on the voluntary market or for tax compliance matters. So thus far, we have on the Cookstove side, we are operating in 3 countries. So we've got a Task, a GS Clean Cooking POA, which covers Zambia and Zimbabwe. And then also we've got a large Vera project in South Africa. Across all 3 projects, we've got over 900,000.
Oh, no. So we lost Edwin here. Maybe due to internet connections. Let's see. Hopefully he'll come back soon. Nathan, maybe if Edwin just froze, do you mind going a little bit more into depth then already on how you guys monitor your Cookstove, your improved Cookstoves? And then
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, and then we'll inform Edwin when he comes back.
All right.
Thank you, Nathan. Okay, so we're back at Bern.
Great. So I believe for most of the carbon asset developers or people who've been monitoring the carbon space for the last 12 to 15 months, I think the buzzword that continues to come up is this word integrity. Initially, we weren't really sure what the market had as the interpretation of integrity, but we have continued to explore and pilot different schemes to ensure that all carbon credits that Burn Manufacturing stamps and produces to market can be independently verified, are completely transparent, and are ground-proofed. One of the key issues that have come up with the integrity concerns is overcrediting and how that relates to usage surveys. So here I have a snapshot of 4 different carbon methodologies that are associated with the quantification of emission reductions from improved Cookstove projects. The first is the gold standard methodology, thermal practices for distributed thermal energy consumption, version 4. This equation here, I'm sure Cindy and the other project developers will be most familiar with. But here you can see a snapshot of all the variables that go into the computation of these emission reductions. I highlight the value there, UPY, which is what we are discussing here today, as the usage rate. In the Vera methodology, VCS VMR 006, this value has a different connotation and representation in the equation, but effectively means the same thing. The usage rate adjustment here is simply supposed to account for any drop-off or any other variables that have prevented persons who initially received or purchased improved Cookstoves and are now no longer participating within your program. Within the CDM methodology as it was then constituted, you'll see the formula being very similar to what you've just seen for the Vera methodology. Indeed, the Vera methodology borrows heavily from the AMS2G guidance with good reason. In its 13th iteration, the CDM has received a lot of comments and meaningful contributions from project developers in terms of how to size and compute emission reductions associated with biomass. And there again, we see how that value plays in. When it comes to our electric offering under the gold standard methodology, MMECD version 1.2, the equation really moves away from usage as a user-defined parameter that associates drop-off rates, right? The entire value, the metered methodology, is an association of carbon credits with the kilowatt hours generated and used in the household. So you'll see a snapshot there of equation number 4, where you can see exactly how the electricity that is being consumed within the project scenario, basically how many kilowatt hours households are using to cook or for cooking events at their households, are then equated into the computations for emissions reductions. Up above, I have a quick snapshot in terms of how we have designed our IoT infrastructure at Burn. All of our induction cookers will be able to relay real-time kilowatt-hour consumption, which then, of course, negates the value of having any field assessments for that parameter associated with usage. So what you'll see is that all of these standards across the different registries, Verra, Gold Standard, or the CDM as it was then constituted, place a heavy premium on this value called the usage rate. Indeed, what we notice and what we've seen from our observance in the field is that this value has a linear impact in terms of the emission reduction project developers are always looking to find. So over a 5-year lifespan, what you'll see is that most project developers will start off at near 100% adoption and usage rate, and then that starts to taper off the longer the stoves have been in the field. From an integrity perspective, one can see that there's a perverse incentive to maintain these usage rates as high as they possibly can. And that's kind of what this discussion will be focusing on in the transition away from what we currently are doing right now, which is user-led, usage survey-based usage rate definitions, to more of a continuous stove sensor and data-driven approach towards assessing usage rates. I can proceed here. So the gold standard really doesn't have a preset definition of who a user is for your Cookstove project. You are required to define this within your project, your POA design document, if that's how you're structuring your project, or indeed simply within your project design document. By definition, you must ensure that your definitions are compliant with the gold standard usage rate requirements. And here there's a specific emphasis on continued use of the stoves, of project stoves, is what I mean, displacement or activities that promote the displacement of baseline stoves, and then, of course, a real-time verification of what you're reporting as your usage rates with verifiable evidences that VVBs or indeed the gold standard themselves will have to look at. On the Verra side, we see more of a delineation that is focused on drop-off rate. But interestingly, there is a very strong correlation between what they call stove operation rates, which is a correlation between how much of a project stove, which in our case would have been a Jikokoa or a Kuniokoa, is being used against the ratio of time or frequency of use that baseline stoves are being used. So those are the kind of high-level variations in terms of how usage rates are defined. Similar to the graph on the right shows similar what we see as usage rates across the market. And this is a usage rate curve that we have kind of shared with you all based on one of our older projects. So this is a project which had stoves throughout the lifespan of our project stoves. Our stoves are designed for a 7 to 10 year lifespan. And so our older projects, we were able to develop a usage rate of this nature. So what you see here is a usage rate that starts off about 90% adoption and use at the very beginning stages of the project distribution. So these would be stoves which are what we call age cohort 0 to 1, meaning that from the project start date, or rather when the stove has started to be used, it's a 12-month horizon. This is based also on the gold standard approach to the usage rate definitions, so that you do not have a static position for each of the cohorts, but rather you use a weighted average. So for the usage rate curve that I have shown up here, what we see is that we ended up with about a 68% usage rate, so that we have a representation of all usage and drop-off across the different age cohorts within our field. So from an integrity perspective, what are the concerns that we are kind of trying as Burn to move away from in the current system of the usage survey, and more looking towards the future of where we think the industry will land? As mentioned, there's a huge incentive of having near maximum usage rate or adopted usage rate reported, but there are different ways that bad players can game the system to be able to generate more emissions reductions, which is counterintuitive to what we as BAN think carbon finance and carbon markets were designed for. Implicit within these surveys is a survey bias that many academic reports have rightfully identified. When you visit a household to ask them, do you use my stove every day? But you have other incentives that you provided to these households. Households are less inclined to give you what is an objective truth as opposed to what they think you want to hear. And that goes without saying that different enumerators collecting this data have their own incentives in terms of what they're supposed to report. And that's a huge issue that I think the different registries are looking to evolve and provide further stricter guidance both for project developers as well as VVBs, in this case, the persons who audit our projects. There's also the issue of correlating stove usage in the field with the durability and manufacturing specifications provided. So there are instances of project developers who are claiming 90 to 99% usage rates of project stoves within their 4th or 5th year of operation, but we know that those stoves can only be useful for about 2 to 3 years. And that's a huge issue that we need to fix, not only from an overcrediting perspective, but a fictitious claim perspective, which is something that we in the cookstove industry would like to move away from. Right now, there's still a huge reliance on the project developer to identify what usage is and create a protocol for how that should be monitored. Without set limits within the standards or registries themselves. And again, I need to make it known that we are observing increased improvements both from the gold standard and the VCS on this metric in particular, but there still remains a lot of leeway in the interpretation and use of these surveys. So if there is no correlation, which is coming to my 4th point here, between user-reported end user surveys without any requirements for photo evidences or other evidences that the VVBs then claim, it's easy to make a binary type of equation that just says, have you stopped using the stove, yes or no, therefore you're a user. Whereas we like to go further and beyond to really make sure that what we are reporting is not only supported by accurate and as minimal biases within our surveys, but a whole activity threshold that supports our usage rate. So we've already talked about how our stoves are pretty much best in class and manufactured here locally with stove repair centers distributed across the continent. But beyond that, we also want to make sure that everything we're reporting as a user hits certain thresholds. For us, that means, for example, that the household that is using our stove is using it for the stove purpose that was intended. So for example, a household that would be using the stove for light commercial activities might not qualify within our baseline definition and therefore would be eliminated from the conversation as a user. We also want to make sure that we're not reporting stoves being used when stoves are broken. And this is a huge variable for us. We want to make sure that households and end users have access to repair stations. And for whatever reason, if their stoves have not been repaired for a protracted period of time, then obviously we do not include those within our usage definition. We also want to make sure that a stove has been used for at least one cooking event in a day. So this is why we have a frequency threshold of about 7 times a week for the usage threshold. We also want to make sure that we're capturing as rich data as possible, including the GPS coordinates, field observations. Are there ashes on the stove? Are there embers that would indicate that the stove has been used within a reasonable time before our surveys? And so we want to make sure that all of these activities are also correlated with factual, actual measurements. So whenever we do our usage surveys, we also roll out separate campaigns for what we call kitchen performance tests. And whereas kitchen performance tests do not give us a good indication of usage, they do allow us to get a very real position in terms of how many stoves households are using. And this now feeds into the ongoing conversation on stove stacking across Africa. I can pause there if there are any questions, or I can just proceed, Melena.
There are a few questions, but I think it's good for you maybe to just proceed because the questions so far in the chat at least are general. So I think we can keep them for after when Edwin has also presented. And Yeah, so just finish, and then Cindy will start with her questions.
Okay, sounds good. Because a majority of our projects, in fact, 100% of our actual carbon credits issued have come from the gold standard, a lot of our interpretation of these usage requirements is as a function of the gold standard rules. The gold standard has a three-tier system of definition of usage rates. They have a best practice where you can claim up to 100% usage only if you have continuous stove monitors enabled, and we'll get that into the next conversation. Where we fall right now is under the best practice, good practice guidelines, where we are able to claim a maximum of 90% usage rate, provided we do a number of additional functions over and above our usage monitoring. And these include, for example, what we call end user awareness campaigns, where we make sure that we are sending people out into the field to continuously engage and interact with our end users, not only as a transactional platform to gain usage information, but also to understand real challenges that households are facing with the usage of our stoves, so that we can continuously improve on the design and efficacy of their stoves in general. We have robust and consistent training modules for our sales agents to be able to go out into the field to have these continuous end user awareness engagements, and also to provide additional user information to these households at the time of need. A snapshot below is from our Nigeria project, where we asked households, how did you learn about our Cookstoves? Which of our interventions have enabled you to really interact with burn manufacturing, not only as your cookstove provider, but as a partner with you in this modern clean cooking energy journey? And you'll see a lot of the emphasis has really been placed in terms of the end user information and awareness that's provided at the point of sale and immediately after the point of sale, over and above other activities that we can do, like market activations and other installations at different locations where we feel a lot of end users who fit our profile would be located in. Which brings us into the conversation of continuous stove monitors. So right now, we believe, for all of the reasons that I've raised above in terms of the integrity concerns that are very valid with the usage rate defined by usage survey approach, the intervention of continuous stove monitors now comes into bear. This conversation has been going on for better of a decade right now, with very good pilots that had been initiated, I believe, in Southern Sudan and different parts of East Africa, to test the efficacy of these stove sensors. At their very core definition, these are data loggers that record differences in temperature and cooking events. So that's how they define what usage is. They are able to record increase in temperatures over a sustained period of time, and within their algorithms built into those sensors or separately procured, establish those as cooking events. They are typically very portable, and you can be able to install them not only on your project stoves, but some of these sensors have the ability to even be adapted to baseline stoves, up to and including 3-stone fires, which can become an important requirement, especially for projects which are looking for version 4 gold standard projects, as well as AMS2G and Vera projects. Quick snapshot in terms of what project developer concerns here are. They are costly. There's no real way to mask that effect. A good, reliable sensor will cost a project developer anything from the range of $7 to north of $100, depending on the kind of feedback that they want to receive with it. If you're a large developer or you're a project developer who's looking to really scale, that can be really price competitive. Even with all of the carbon financing that we're able to generate for us to be able to subsidize the price of the cost, adding, in this case, what would be a 10 to 15% cost in terms of the actual stove generation cost, kind of removes many developers away from a global distribution of these sensors on all of the stoves that they have. So what we are seeing now, and what I'll discuss in another slide, is this sampling approach where sensors can be installed on a smaller cross-section of the households as opposed to the global population. Hopefully prices will deteriorate to a point where we can install these on all our stoves, but this is the direction we're heading over to. Another key concern that we have with these sensors, and most project developers will have, is their durability and operation in remote areas. Our cookstoves are not limited just to capital cities where access to repair stations and access to a sales agent is very easy, but we have stoves distributed in the most remote regions across the continent. And in that case, one has to be assured that the stoves that are installed, one, are relatively insulated from the actual ambient temperature or stove temperature increases that one will witness. Two, they have to be durable. Certain of these households, especially for wood projects which are more rural and more remote, people cook outside. People may have situations where they're cooking for very large meals, for very large households. So you want to make sure that you're installing a stove that can give you usage data, but without the risk of breaking such expensive and vital equipment. And so here's a cross-section of different stove sensors that we found in the market. This is from a 2016 report. So a lot of these values could be updated. If there are any Cookstove sensors here, I hope I did not misrepresent your data at all. In terms of a comparison between what survey-based approaches towards establishing usage looks like as opposed to sensor-based, it stands to say that obviously there's a higher threshold of data integrity where usage data is actually being derived from actual verifiable data imprints that are coming from households as opposed to usage surveys. This has a flip side, however, in that a lot of the data that is then received can be quite cumbersome, especially if you're recording data over a protracted period of time over very short intervals. So you can imagine if you're recording cooking data or temperature events every minute for a cook stove over over a 90-day or 120-day period, it can be quite intensive for the project developer to understand. So here we usually encourage, and what we are doing internally is really have detailed conversations on the algorithms that are used to then associate temperature intervals with cooking events, so that the use of the sensors does not become onerous to us, rather than complementary, which is what we hoped it would be. Here I have just a few of the screenshots in terms of what the actual data would look like as you receive it. So you'll be able to see that the temperature logger will actually just monitor time and temperature, and then the algorithms are the ones that do the association with actual cooking events. How we are looking to structure our digital monitoring and verification through these continuous sensors is using a sampling approach where we will have different age cohorts represented with at least 30 households, and we want to be able to monitor their cooking habits over a 90-day period. We feel that this is another benefit of using CSMs as opposed to usage surveys, which give you a static representation of the household's recollection, as opposed to a real 3-month video that can show you variations because of seasonal variations, impact of holidays, impact of children returning back from school. All of these can be structured within a monitoring campaign to give us more robust usage data. And I think that is it in terms of where we are at, but a quick side note here. As far as our electric digital monitoring verification is concerned, our stoves already come with inbuilt IoT software, so we will be able to track real-time kilowatt-hour data, and that will satisfy usage requirements from the methodology perspective. From the biomass perspective, we are looking to do pilots, which will begin in the month of October in Kenya first and foremost, before we move into the other markets, to test the efficacy of some of these stoves on both our charcoal and wood stoves. So here we're looking for how easy it is for us to be able to associate cooking events with temperature and time increases, as well as the training and other different mechanisms that go into data interpretation. So it's a really exciting time for us. We really welcome all of the market changes moving towards this digital space, and looking forward to share and learn as much from other project developers as we head on this journey. Thanks.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much for stepping in, and also for creating such an elaborate presentation. It was super interesting. We have a lot of great questions in the chat. Cindy, I'm just going to give you the lead, and we can also then go into the questions that are in the chat. And Edwin will come to you afterwards. So then we'll wrap up with Nathan, and then we'll go into we'll go to task. It's a little change in the program, but that's all right. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, Thank you, Melena. Thank you, Nathan, for the presentation. It's very, very detailed. Thank you very much. And we have definitely learned and saw different types of monitoring coming on. Just to kick off the question and answer, I would like also to know, did you mention that this the digital monitoring is starting in October? Does it mean you haven't tried it yet, or you have tried it yet and seen the different graphs that you presented?
Yeah, so we've been talking to different stove sensor providers, trying to figure out which is the best fit. And that journey has taken us the better part of 6 to 9 months. So what will begin in October is a pilot for a cross-section of our stoves, both wood and charcoal in Kenya, as we figure out how we want to then roll this to become part of our standardized monitoring campaigns in the years forward.
Okay, great. My next question is all the different types of monitoring systems that you've put in place. I mean, there are the sales agents, there are all these repair and replacement kind of situation. And I'm just wondering, in areas, for example, Commonland project in Zambia, where there are so many things coming into place. For example, some of the areas within the Kaza area, probably not very accessible. Like, it would take you some time before someone calls you and says, my Cookstove is not working or something like that. How is it working for you? And what are the different types of methods that you're using to enable that these Cookstoves are repaired or replaced as soon as possible? And you also mentioned about the 90-day where you have been collecting data about the different types of use. So if someone hasn't used this Cookstove for maybe a meal, you don't include them. Is it just a meal or the day, or what would you define that as a usage? If someone has, like if you've been seeing a repair done in that particular Cookstove.
All great questions. So I think I'll begin with the first one in terms of how do we ensure that we can provide means to access for repair stations in especially remote areas. So obviously with our charcoal projects, which are mostly located in urban and peri-urban regions, it's pretty easy for households to be able to identify where those stations are. But for our wood projects, which exist mainly in rural and remote regions, that requires a bit more of end user awareness and information. So how Burn structures this is that literally from the point of senior management deciding we want to move into a country, there's a whole sales agent mechanism that is put in place. We realize that the quality of interaction at the very interval that the household purchases a stove becomes the primary interface of how their relationship with ourselves is instructed. So we have really robust sales agent training mechanism where specific milestone KPIs are placed within that sales agent's training. And key one of them is what we call grievance mechanism. And underneath that function is repair center information. So literally at the point of sale, we tell you, hey, if you ever have a problem with your stove, you have a 1-year warranty with us and we'll repair it for you for free, no cost to yourself. Here's how you reach out to us. A phone number is placed literally on the project stove, which is a global phone number. Households can reach us at any point in time, and we can give them information on how we can collect or how they can send over their stoves for repair. So this is a huge part of the customer education platform that we provide. And not only falling within the responsibility of our sales agents, but our entire field operations activities really emphasize this. We make sure that even where we're not possible to have repair stations within a county, province, or whatever subnational region makes sense, we try and have centers which we can outfit and have readily available, which might be a little bit of a distance from the households, but certainly not the distance of moving towards Nairobi, for example, if a stove was installed in rural Turkana. So it's an engagement of continuous updates to the end user and ensuring that all of our repair stations Here, for example, in Kenya, we have better part of 36 distributed across all counties. Majority of counties are stocked and ready to repair in real time. So that's how we address it in that perspective.
All right, thank you very much. I think I will take maybe 3 questions from the question and answer platform, and then we will give Edwin the opportunity to go on, then we can answer the other questions after. So we'll start up, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Jeans, hi, quick question. While we wait, how did you monitor the stoves? I hope you answered by now. If not, please feel free to ask the question maybe towards the end after Adrian. The next question is from Cosette from Africa Lakes Initiative. In what areas are these stoves used mostly, urban or rural? How are they maintained to ensure continuous use for the duration of their lifetime? Nathan, do you want to?
Yeah, so in every market that we venture into, we have a 3-pronged approach to how we define our carbon project. We first of all engage in what is called a feasibility study to assess areas which have either primary charcoal or primary wood use. And that kind of informs how we go about our baseline scenario definition. We then conduct very specific gold standard or VERA compliant baseline surveys that create a delineation in terms of the service offering that we provide. So we conduct urban or peri-urban baseline surveys to accommodate households who we found in our feasibility studies as being primary charcoal users. We conduct separate wood baseline surveys for people who or households who are considered within that ambit of being using wood primarily as their fuel of choice. So that's how we create that separation. Both of these stoves, their primary function is to generate the highest thermal efficiency for the longest duration of time. So literally within our stove design, our engineering teams are literally sizing our stoves and designing them with materials to be able to survive for a 7 to 10 year period. Where that is not possible because of different environmental attributes of how people prepare their meals, we then try to work within our warranty system to ensure that we can repair stoves in real time. I hope that answered the question.
I hope so. If not, follow up. The last question before we go to Edwin from Killian. The other questions, Nathan will be available to answer them as we go. From Killian. Nathan, thank you for the great presentation. I have a question about if you plan to relate the continuous monitoring data to the household surveys with the aim to validate the results of the habit surveys to carbon surveys, in other terms. Would this help to gain a picture about the amount and type of bias included in the household surveys?
Yes, that's an excellent question, Killian. Thank you so much for that. So the reason we're rolling out a pilot is to better understand not only what these sensors can do, but how we can also improve our monitoring, reporting, and verification internally. From a pure academic perspective, we expect that for certain regions and certain stove types, there would be a difference between what end users have been reporting as opposed to what the data will tell us. What we hope to be able to do is to provide a correlation that, one, will eliminate some of the biases within the digital survey environment that we have right now, but two, allow us to envision a scalable approach towards using these sensors for a greater sample outside of the standard minimum requirements that have been established right now. It will be an exercise in self-correction and an examination of what this data actually is telling us about how our households are using their stoves, and instances where they have not. It will provide us information over a longer period of time so that we can better define our monitoring and reporting verification compliance. So yes, we are using this as a tool, not only to position ourselves as a leader in the carbon space when markets do demand that house project developers transition to a DMRV space, but also as a self-improvement exercise at Burn.
Great. I think the other questions, Nathan, there are lots of questions about partnerships, sustainability of Burn, Cookstoves. So Nathan will be answering them. If your question is not answered by end of it, we will follow up. Okay. Edwin, it's your chance.
Thanks for coming back to me, and thanks, Nathan, for your very well thought out presentation. I think you've more or less covered all the technical aspects of monitoring from gold standard side, so that now I don't really have to go into them. I might just mention them here and there. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Hopefully we have to press thumbs that whatever happened doesn't happen again, and I get to complete my presentation. So let's just go over here. Okay, so I don't exactly know where you lost me.
Edwin,
but,
if you want to, you can just start all over.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, as I said, I'm Edwin Cogho. I'm a carbon project development manager for Task. We are based in South Africa, our head office, but we've also got some branches in Jersey as well as Australia. We are a carbon project developer, and financier. We specialize in originating, financing, developing and managing carbon project or greenhouse gas mitigation projects. We are a relatively small team, but we do have a big footprint already, and we've been running for about 3.5 to 4 years now. We also do the sales and marketing of our credit, mostly within the compliance and voluntary carbon space. So to thus far, we've got over 910,000 improved cooking devices deployed in 3 countries. So that is in South Africa, where we've got a big Vera project or VCS project using the VMR006 methodology. And then also we've got a gold standard POA, which covers Zambia and Zimbabwe, where we've got also a wood-burning improved cookstove projects, where we distribute the Burn EcoAct Cookstoves, which we also believe is best in class, and we've seen it firsthand operating and working in the field. So I can confirm Nathan's stake in it and his comments on their stove. It really is a great piece of technology. From the Cookstove projects, we've issued over 1.8 million credits so far, and we've got a couple of issues still to come on these projects. And then most recently, we have also just registered BCS BM42 project, where we've got a bunch of rural farmers, cattle farmers, and we employ sustainable grazing practices on their land. We've got over 170,000 hectares under management on that specific project. All of our projects are developed with sustainability and SDG impacts in mind. Most of our projects at least have 5 SDGs, which we do monitor and report on the impact thereof. Even though it isn't necessary on the Vera side, we do it as we do it for all our projects. Yeah, that's that. On the monitoring side of things, we have a twofold approach to monitoring and continuous monitoring. We don't believe that continuous monitoring of Cookstove is just a sensor-based endeavor, but rather that it should be a continual engagement with the community, which ultimately would increase your uptake and usage of the devices. So how we approach this is, first of all, we have very large in-person monitoring campaigns, whereas we start pre-distribution with sensitization meetings, where each and every area we go into or village, we have sensitization meetings, gathering all of the participants in the area around, going through the workings of the Cookstoves, how they work and what the benefits are to them, having cooking demonstrations. Devices get distributed, and then thereafter, boots on the ground monitoring campaign kicks off, which consists of community engagement meetings where we gather the community, have cooking demonstrations, all of these things, where reporting on grievances can happen, as well as valuable impact from the community can be received. In conjunction with this, we also run continual habit surveys. We have boots on the ground monitoring teams going to the participants or stove recipients, going door to door and going through more or less a similar habit survey than what is required from a formal monitoring standpoint. We also do regular kitchen performance testing outside of what is required for verification purposes. And then we also run a call center, which can call beneficiaries as to report grievances, as well as just reports on general stove usage and takeaways from the stove recipients, which we find very, very helpful. These are all practices that we do outside of verification monitoring. Also, we do the verification monitoring, which is stipulated exactly how we have to do it within the respective methodologies, and we follow those practices. As Nathan mentioned previously, so with the gold standard, you can only claim best practice monitoring. They've got this three-tiered approach, and for best practice monitoring, where you can claim up to 100% usage, you need to employ continuous stove usage monitoring through some sort of sensor-based technology. So recently we have endeavored to install infrared temperature sensors to a subset or a sample set of our stoves in each of our projects. The reason for this is, first of all, we want to compare the results we get from these sensors to what we see in our habit surveys to see if it is, in fact, if they do correlate with each other or not, and if not, what is the reason for why they are not doing it. So the sensor we've decided on going is the EcoAct stove use monitor. It is made from it's a solution from Climate Solutions Consulting, and I think Nathan also had a slide there with the launcher app, and I think they might be using these same sensors as well. And this is a very relatively simple piece of technology. It's just a simple IR sensor which detects temperature differences, which you mount directly on the stove. Once the stove gets light, and you can play around in the functioning on when it logs a temperature activity, how much the temperature needs to increase. If you say you set it at 5 degrees Celsius, if the temperature on the stove increases by 5 degrees Celsius, then it starts logging a cooking event. So it logs the amount of cooking events as well as the time that is spent cooking. And this is all stored on the sensor itself. And then a monitor will have to come and draw down the data from the sensor, depending on the intervals you've set it at. So if you pick to a high resolution, then there's only enough storage on the device for a couple of hours, maybe even just a couple of days or a couple of hours of monitoring. Then you will have monitors need to come in and draw down the data more regularly. If you say put it on 5 to 10 minutes, then you can have the sensors out in the field for 1 to 2 months. So yeah, it really depends on what the resolution you want the data to be. But we think that these sensors will actually be very valuable in our usage. We follow the exact same guidance that Nathan is doing on his side, which is guidance given in the gold standard usage rate monitoring document, whereas you have to put at least 100 sensors on 100 devices for 90-day sampling periods at a time. As we are also just running this out now, so unfortunately we don't have any data or anything to show for it, but we hope in the next 3 months we will have something and could share it out on a wider forum. Okay, just my last slide. I don't have a lot of slides, but I hope we can have a bit more of a discussion afterwards. But we see, as with everything, you have advantages and disadvantages. So for our side and our monitoring approach, it really helps us, the boots on the ground monitoring and continual monitoring, it really helps understanding the local context and needs for the specific technology that we implement. So for instance, in our South African project, when we first started distributing our stoves here, we found that usage was a bit low. And the reason for it was that the stoves couldn't accommodate three-legged pots. And this helped us, so this valuable insight from the monitoring helps us to engage the stove manufacturer, which we use, which is different in South Africa in the rest of our projects. And they could fix or revamp the stove a little to allow for three-legged pots to be used. That's why this continual engagement with communities is very valuable, because it helps inform the project design, potential project changes that need to happen. And not only that, it also helps adapt community support for the project, and it builds trust in yourself. As Nathan mentioned, you do have, you might encounter bias because you're there on the ground now, and the beneficiary is saying something that you want to hear. But we found through regular engagement, and this is also proven through literature studies as well as lots of peer-reviewed articles, that the more frequently you monitor, the less that it brings this, it could bring this bias down. And we really hope to achieve that with our continuous monitoring campaigns. And this also just helps us to inform our future project design. So any new projects or endeavors that we wish to pursue, we've got lots of experience, lots of data, lots of information from our continuous monitoring, which could help inform a better project design in the future. Now, as with everything, we've got disadvantages. First of it is definitely stakeholder fatigue. If you run a project like this with a continuous monitoring strategy where people are going house to house, door to door, doing KPTs, which are very intrusive. It takes 4 days for one KPT test. You run the risk of having stakeholder fatigue. So this could have the exact opposite effect of what you want to do. So people get sick of you, and you running and interfering with their lives the whole time, which means that they stop using your stove or stop letting you into monitor, which is even worse than that. And then also just challenges of scale. So it's not inexpensive to run these programs, especially on the sensor side. We're talking about a sensor that's almost 30 to 50% the cost of the device itself, or the cook stove. So if you're talking about implementing it on each and every cook stove, that could make your project financially unfeasible. So that's why we're also at the moment pursuing just gold standards usage rate guidelines, where we put it on a sample set of stoves, and we'll every 3 months or so just swap out those sensors with the other set of stoves, and then hopefully build up as time goes on. But yeah, that's that. And I also don't think, I can see that bias might occur with stove use sensors as well, which is maybe something that Nathan has thought about. But it works on exactly the same principle. If you're there at the household and you ask them, are they using their stove, they can say what you want them to hear, yes. And the exact same can happen with the sensor. So if you come there and install a sensor on the device, they could know, well, when they know you're actually monitoring their cooking now, that for the 3 months the sensor's there, they can cook more on the device, and then afterwards they can stop cooking. But the hope is, in that time where you're there and actively engaging, and then they think, well, we're using the stove now, they would actually realize the benefit of it and keep on using it. So that's a good thing that could come out of the bias that occurs when actually surveying, as well as implying direct measurements of your cook stove. But yeah, that's that. Just a quick one. I'm open for discussion and questions. And yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edwin. That was great. We have an understanding of how your own monitoring system is going on. I think it's quite elaborate. Maybe just to start off, in the rollout for the sensors to be used in the field, when do you plan to start this monitoring? And just to understand your preparation or feasibility on how this is going to work, would you be willing to share more information about that? How did you assess how it's going to work? When do you plan to roll it out? And in terms of data management, I think one of the things that Nathan mentioned is that it looks like it has a lot of data collection, and it can be a lot for project developers. So if you can share more information about that and your preparation towards that, to be interesting to hear.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Cindy. So we have basically just from the beginning of this year started planning to implement some technology on our stove. So it's still relatively new with us as well. We research a whole bunch of sensors, much like Nathan and team did, but mostly how we came to use the exact sensor is it was actually the only one which they had in stock at enough devices in stock for us to use and to run this pilot for our stoves as well. And it seemed like one of the most the better technologies out there. We have just, I think, about 2 weeks ago started installing the devices on the South African project. We are still waiting for them to arrive in country in Zambia, so we can start rolling out the devices over there as well on a random subset of stoves. And on the data handling side, it all comes down to the resolution that you set your logger at on how many data points you will have. But it's 3 months of data on 100 devices at a time. So it's not that much, and it's not really. I wouldn't say you'll use Excel to analyze it, but in something like MATLAB or with Python or R, it's not a big data set to handle through just normal big data handling techniques and some scripts. So I don't see the analyzing of the data part as the biggest challenge of it. It's more just making sure that the stove sensor is working accurately, and that corresponds with what we see in the habit survey as well. And yeah.
Okay. A follow-up question on that, which was also asked in the Q&A section. Does monitoring assume availability of electricity and connectivity for sending data?
So that's also why we ended up using this sensor. So this sensor has a battery life of about, I think, 4 years, depending also on the resolution that you set it to use. And in the areas that we operate, which is very remote and rural areas, so we focus mainly on wood-burning cookstoves and wood-burning households. So these are the remotely and very rural areas, similar to what you've got in the Simalaha Conservancy, where most of the time there is no internet connection or connectivity. So how this exact stove use sensor work, it's got a small memory capacity. It logs temperature events. As I said, depending on your resolution that you set, it can either store, say, a couple of hours worth of data or a couple of months worth of data, all depending on your regular resolution. And that's why running this pilot is so important. We need to figure out what the best resolution would be to capture the cooking events frequently. So how it would work, a monitor, he's got a launcher device. Nathan had a picture of the launcher screen there in his slides, where he'll install the sensor, he'll activate the sensor, set the resolution, everything. And then in a month's time or a week's time, whatever is needed, he'll come back to that household and download the data from the logger, and then it can be processed thereafter. So you don't need electricity or anything to run the sensors. You do get more intricate sensors, which I'm sure that you do need electricity for, and some sort of IoT device which will send data remotely. But for the most part in our project, it's not feasible because there is no network or signal and electricity. So that's why it's very important to consider the project you are running and where it is and just the local context of it before implementing a sensor campaign, which will not be feasible. Ultimately, it will be a waste of money. So that's why lots of consideration has gone into the sensors that we use, because it really matters. And we, yeah, I think that answers the question.
Okay. And you mentioned that you're rolling it out. Would you be willing to share when this starts, the monitoring, and what percentage of Cookstoves or end users are you targeting?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part. You just broke up a bit.
You are going to roll out the use of these sensors soon. If possible, would you share when it is going to start? And what percentage of end users are you targeting?
Well, as I said, it already started in South Africa. We're now just waiting for the sensors to arrive in Zambia. Then we'll start the rollout over there as well. So basically immediately, we hope to use the data on the gold standard side. So our Zambian project towards our verification to the end of this year, which means we really need to get the sensors out in the field because they need to be out there for at least 90 days on a set of 100 households. The reason why we picked 100 is because that is based on the gold standard usage rate guidelines. You need to have sensors on at least 100 households. Statistically wise, if they meet the relevant confidence interval and precision that is required from gold standard side, and just normally that's acceptable in the scientific community, then I don't see this as being a too small a sample size, because I mean it's just statistics, and it's accepted everywhere in other fields of science, so it should be applicable on Cookstoves as well. Yeah, and if we are to use it and in the gold standard side, then we are required to share our results in the public forum anyway, so we will share the results that we get from the devices.
Okay, great. Maybe a question that both you, Edwin, and Nathan will answer. Exciting work with the sensors. Have you seen this translate into stronger demand from carbon credit buyers? Like, I think apart from maybe comparison, are there other benefits?
I'll go first. So if I understand this correctly, so one of the reasons why we've endeavored in installing these sensors is that one of our buyers insisted on it, is that we need to install sensors on our devices. They don't really care if we share the results publicly or not, but as long as they can see the results, and that what we saying and monitor for our habit surveys are actually what we are seeing out in the field on these sensor-based devices. I'm yet to see if there'll be a higher price point attached to these credits. Personally, I haven't heard of anyone offering more because of the stove is being monitored. But I do know that some of the credits coming from the gold standard metered and measured methodology have sold for a significantly higher price than a normal cook stove credit. But these were also on electric cookers, which have zero emissions related to them. So.
Yeah, completely agreed. I think what we've seen is a continued evolution of Cookstove, our carbon credit buyers. 4 or 5 years ago, a ton was a ton. Today, our buyers are increasingly sophisticated. They're saying, we want ground-proofed data, we want KPTs, we want as many SDGs as you possibly can. It hasn't yet translated into a price. There is no market index that says that this commodity, this carbon credit, therefore should be valued for X because it's done X, Y, Z. That doesn't exist yet. But we think that the further distinction that we can create from other developers, and I'm glad to hear that Task is really embarked on this journey with, I think, the same technology provider as us, we'll start to see a segregation of buyers who are now placing a premium on all assets we can do to insulate our projects from any integrity concerns. So in the short term, there is no market premium, but we do think 3-4 years from now, it will start to become more calcified in terms of the buyers from the cookstove space who can actually sell at a premium because they've invested in this kind of DMRV space.
I think that answers Alexander's question. And now I will just go now back-to-back questions in the question and answer section. If you have any question, please put it up there so that we are able to address it. I think Cosette's question was answered. So we go to Isham. The criteria of carbon standards, gold standard, BCS, are increasingly getting more strict. Are you worried that the criteria might get too strict at some point, which might damage your business? Or do you think it is still not strict enough? We can start with Edwin, then Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already at a at a place in time where that's starting to happen, and especially with some of the methodologies. For instance, on the VCS side with their VMR 6 methodology, on the recent version, they put an arbitrary discount on FNRB values of 26%, which doesn't seem to have any scientific backing as to why. So even if you, through your third-party studies, get an FNRB value of 26 of 50%, you still have to apply a discount of 26%, which will make a project financially unviable. So we're already seeing it coming from the standards, just the same as wood use caps on gold standard side. It completely kills a project. And more recently, we've noticed on the gold standard measured and metered methodology, if you transition from a wood burning or biomass-based cook stove to an LPG cook stove, which LPG burns a lot cleaner than wood. Although the emission factor is a bit higher, but you use so much less LPG than what you would, there's a substantial emission reduction associated with it. But in the way that you're calculating it in that methodology, you're not quantifying the baseline consumption, but you're calculating your baseline emissions from what the useful energy is in the project scenario, and multiplying that with your baseline fuel emission factor. And this significantly underestimates the baseline, which then in fact makes the project unviable. So we are already seeing it in all of the new methodologies and revisions to the methodologies, but that also just as the result of us having to be more creative in our project design and how we do it. So we're not opposed to it getting more stricter, but we're already approaching a level where it will make projects unviable in the future. And that, along with new tax regulations that's being implemented by governments, especially the African governments, it is a difficult space to operate in at the moment. And yeah, we'll have to see where it goes. But we're already at a place where methodologies are getting more strict and making projects unviable in many countries and many African countries as well, which is the opposite of what we would like.
Yeah, just my 2 cents on that. I think what we are looking for is corrective actions within the carbon markets that eliminate overcrediting, but also don't create situations of undercrediting. And I think that's kind of what Edwin was also alluding to there with the different sets of methodologies. We need for methodologies to eliminate uncertainty. That's the first part. All buyers are always asking us, how come emission reductions change? And we tell them methodologies are an iterative science. Until we get to a point where these are locked in, things will always change. The problem becomes where changes are made to a methodology or changes are made to a registry, which are not necessarily fact-based. So in the avoidance of doubt, you create more uncertainty, which is what Edwin was alluding to there with the FNRB issue in particular. So there needs to be broader stakeholder consensus in how we come about ensuring that there is integrity without eliminating the essence of what carbon markets are designed for. The less financial incentives that are available in the carbon space, the less these technologies can be distributed. And there needs to be a balance that completely balances out the two needs here. A rational economic need for entrepreneurs to be incentivized to encourage technologies that move people away from traditional and energy carbon intensive practices, but also with the strongest environmental certainty possible. This is incredibly difficult to do as a social science. And so we welcome changes that are being made. All we ask for is that we as project developers can have even louder of a voice to contribute our knowledge and sharing, and that we're not providing knee-jerk responses to pockets of our world that do not necessarily represent the true realities of what is happening on our continent, and certainly for end users of our technologies.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and answer and ask the next one, okay? Otherwise, I'm so quiet in the corner. All right. So this question was asked by Joanna Peterson regarding the surveys. What do you think of the burden you place on these households by questioning so often about the usage? From their perspective, do they think it is worth it to be questioned so often compared to what the cook stove offers them? Is there a way to decrease this? Edwin, yeah, go ahead first.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned stakeholder fatigue, and it is a real thing. The more frequent you visit a household, you run the risk of them getting sick of you and not really wanting to have anything to do with you, and then that has the opposite effect of what you want. So then they stop using the stove, and it's really difficult to find a balance or exact number of times that you can visit a household in a year, which would be non-intrusive. But we do found, luckily, we do run quite a big project, so it is virtually impossible to visit each and every user every year. So most of the time we draw random samples and go visit households at random. So it's a difficult balance, but we would try to visit at least each and every household once every 1 to 2 years. But we do know it is a near impossible task to do that, even that. But yeah, it's a difficult one, but you do get stakeholder fatigue. That's what I'm trying to get to, and it's you have to find a way to strike the balance between what is acceptable and what is not. Especially the habit surveys aren't really intrusive. That intrusive, it's 10 to 5 minutes of a person's day. But if you look at KPTs, which are 4 consecutive days, which last anything from an hour to a half hour, depending on the tasks at hand, that's much more intrusive. And especially in these rural areas where people have to go to their farm to tend their farms and so forth, it becomes a real difficult task. So what we do, especially in monitoring cases like this, we would go a week before and just let them know we are coming next week to do this. Is it all right? And we also always ask permission for them to do audits, or well, not audits, but surveys or KPTs. And if they don't give their permission, then we don't go do that. But also, we distribute our stoves free of cost. So the cost that the beneficiary incurs, and he signs to this through an end user agreement that he signs when receiving the stove, is that in exchange for the cook stove, we claim the credits, as well as they have to be open for monitoring activities. So they sign this knowingly that they will get monitored from time to time, and that they have to open their doors in exchange for the cook stove. And I can assure you, from what I've seen in the field and also from the responses we've got from the beneficiaries, it's a small price to pay for the benefit that you actually get from these stoves, just on the household level, the benefits these guys receive from implementing these technologies. It really eye-opening. I've just come from the field last week where I went on a site visit with auditors. And you can really see the difference between a project household and a non-project household, and just the wood that they consume. And people are generally happy with the devices, and they welcome you into their homes. But as I said, there is a fine balance between not being there too often, and we try our best not to do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the analogy for anyone who's not within the cookstove space would be, imagine a government worker or a telemarketer asking you questions year on year. It can feel very intrusive and very invasive of your own privacy, especially when you're being asked questions about what you did before and what you're now doing with the project stoves. This whole entire concept of user fatigue is a very real problem for us, which are constantly devising ways to move around. So just like Edwin mentioned, we have very elaborate consent mechanisms. We conduct visits and household awareness with our well-trained customer experience teams on the phone to book and reserve and explain why these audits are required, because it's not just the usage survey. For a percentage of those people sampled, the auditor will then come again and do a similar survey a couple of weeks after. And so managing that in the field is a very chaotic process, because we honestly do not want to feel or create a situation where the end user feels that this is a transactional relationship, like we're mining data from you for a commercial incentive. That's not our objective at all. And so this is why we emphasize a lot of our end user awareness, literally from the point of sale, to mention to you that at a period of time, we'll come and ask you a few questions. We'll try and take as much of your time as possible and make this a more interactive session so that you don't feel like you're being bombarded every 12 months, but you're aware of what is coming, and we're continuously working with you throughout that journey. But this is a random sample, so it will very, very likely affect less of the people who we've interacted with before those hold hands. But it's a rapidly evolving situation, part of the reasons why we could not be more excited to move into a DMRV space.
Yeah, so I will ask the next question. Sorry, I will not be able to read everything, but all questions will be answered by the panel. So I will just sample a few from the chat box. There's one, let's see, yeah, from Harold. How do you address other energy services than cooking? For example, heating water for hygiene, warming the room, etc., given that many of these energy services are generated at the same time, heating water for tea or heating the room. The various energy service needs of biomass-dependent households make a number of stoves necessary, so that if you calculate the household ER for one stove, you may miss the extra use of emissions for other services. So maybe we can ask Edwin to answer that.
Yeah, no, we'll do. So that's the name is a bit misleading, kitchen performance test, but that's why this is so valuable, especially in a rural context where all of the energy provided is coming from biomass or wood, in most cases, which the beneficiaries can collect. So even if they use their cook stove for boiling water, heating water, all of these things, and if they use a freestone fire in conjunction with that, they are using wood. So in a kitchen performance test, you go to the household and you measure the wood being used. So at the beginning of a kitchen performance test, you will set out wood. The monitor will explain exactly the test, how it works, that they are only to use wood from that pile. As the 4 days continue, the monitor will come back each day to measure the wood that's left over from the previous day. And that wood would have been used for cooking, boiling water, heating water for bathing, and might even have been used for freestone fire, which they use in conjunction with ICS device. So you capture all of that wood being used regardless of device or technology. And that ultimately goes into your emissions reduction calculation. So if you see this stove stacking happening, you get a higher project fuel consumption, which then results in lower ERs. So you capture that through your kitchen performance test that you run. So you do this both in the baseline scenario on non-project households, where you get your baseline wood usage, and then throughout your project, each monitoring period. So we have at the moment biannual monitoring periods. So every 6 months, we'll do KPTs, and we'll then relate that back or compare that back with the baseline scenario to calculate your emissions reductions. And as I said, with a KPT, you're measuring all wood being used and not just wood that's being used for cooking. You can structure it like that, but it will be very difficult, first of all, to explain to a household that this pile of wood they can only use for cooking, and this pile of wood they have to use for this and this and this. And then also, if you don't use it for all the wood that's being used for all energy purposes, then you miss out, as you said, on a lot of other emissions that's happening, which was captured in your baseline scenario. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I hope it answered the question. So I will have one more question, then we can have a wrap up. Please, all questions will be answered. We will share with the team. I think I've seen questions about partnerships with BAN, about Cookstoves in Malawi, and I think they can also all see all the questions, so they'll get back to you. So the last question will be from Chessie Hoare. How do the monitoring sensors work considering the heat? I think that will be a question for Edwin, sharing maybe some of the feedback they have from South Africa, where the sensors are in practice, and what feelings are coming out about the sensors from the users on the ground, especially those in rural areas.
Okay, so if I understand this question correctly, so first of all, how the monitoring sensors work considering the heat. So it works with normal infrared technology, and you set the threshold of what it would do or what it would consider as a cooking event. So much similar during COVID, when everyone had those sensors that they press at you and it gives the heat coming off of your body. It works on the exact same science of this, but you can set, say, if the temperature or the surface temperature of the stove increases by 10 degrees or 20 degrees Celsius, then it records a cooking event being happened. So you have to set it at a temperature that would be much higher than what the temperature would achieve if it would be standing outside in the sun. But also it shouldn't be too high that it doesn't, because you're not measuring directly where the heat comes out. The way the sensor is structured, it will be impossible to mount over there. So that's why the pilot studies are very important, just so that we can see that we've got the sensor plated right, as well as the resolution, as well as the temperature that's needed for it to record a cooking event. But generally, I'm not exactly sure what the temperature would be or the increase would be to log a cooking event. Maybe Nathan might know from their pilot studies or their of their initial experience, but we'll have to wait and see. And then what are the feelings coming out about the sensors from the users on the ground, especially those in rural areas? I'm not exactly sure how to interpret this question, but as far as it's a very small, non-intrusive sensor that gets monitored or placed directly on the stove. It doesn't impact anything on the usage of the stove or anything like that. As I said, it could have the effect of increasing stove usage now that they know you are actively monitoring the stove, which is a good thing. Hopefully, after that 3-month period, they continue with the use. Which we will have to wait and see.
Great. Thank you very much for your questions. They will be addressed, and then I will recommend it back to Melena.
Finally, I can say something again. No, thank you so much, Nathan and Edwin, for taking the time to present this. I never thought the continuous monitoring of cookstoves can be so interesting, and I was really, really captivated by both of your guys' presentations. So thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge and your experience with it so far. I just want to bring the attention to the next webinars that we have coming up this week. So for all of those who are still here, on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Amsterdam, so Central European time, we will have another webinar about the monitoring of soil carbon. And will also be very interesting. We have there 4 representatives from 4 different organizations. And then at the end of the week on Friday, we have another webinar on diverse credits for landscape restoration. So there we will look a little bit more into biodiversity credits and also a little bit into wildlife credits. And you're all very welcome to join. Also you, Nathan and Edwin, if you have the time and are interested, please do join. And yes, we will we will make the recording public. Everybody will have access to it. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much for joining and sharing all this valuable information with us.
No worries.
Thanks
so much for hosting.
Wonderful
Thanks for having us.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.